Hello and welcome to the Be Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast, whereby we are reshaping life, leadership, and business from the inside out. And today I am welcoming to the show all the way from New York and especially in Williamsburg, where there is a crazy snowstorm and we're having a crazy heat wave back here. So talk about extremities. But welcome to the show, Reece Griffiths.
Thanks, P. Great to be here. Yeah, I think we're a few hours out, but expecting very heavy downpour momentarily.
Yeah, oh my goodness. And you said like everyone's kind of going to the grocery store to kind of, bunker down for the weekend. I've never been in a a snowstorm like that. It must be like kind of bizarre. I feel like COVID all
Yeah,
over again.
to be honest, yeah, I don't really know what to expect. It's I've only been in the US for a few years, so I'm curious. But I actually weirdly have I'm doing like an online silent retreat this weekend at home, so it's like the perfect weekend. After this, I'm basically logging off for 48 hours, and will be probably locking myself in. So it's timing has worked out for me at least, provided it
Yeah,
doesn't last
how
more
good.
than 2 days. So.
Oh my gosh. We have to talk about that online silent retreat. Offline or online?
It's online, so it's like a Zoom. So it's with a Gaia House is the name of like a meditation organization in the UK that I love, and they do online retreats now and again. And it's just like a Friday to Sunday evening, some kind of Zoom Dharma talks, and then group meditation. So it's the first time I've done one over Zoom, so I am curious, but I think it requires a bit more discipline. But my partner is away this weekend, so I was like, hey, I've minimized distractions, and I should be set to at least give it a good go.
So just actually, before we get right into you, right, but is this, when you say it's online and it's a silent retreat, are you on Zoom for 24/7 or do they tell you, like, do you get off or do you have to keep the screen on? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I also had the same question today. So there are like set sessions where you are on Zoom, and then periods where they kind of tell you what to be doing, but you are not on Zoom. So I think it's a mixture, and you definitely don't have to be on camera the whole time for sure. But there are long periods, like many hours, where the laptop is there, Zoom is on, and there is like a guided meditation. If you open your eyes, you see everyone sat there with their eyes closed. So
Oh, how
it'll be
bizarre. It's
intriguing.
not
Yeah.
bizarre. It sounds intriguing. I've always wanted to do a silent retreat. I don't know if I could do it through Zoom, but I'll be interested to hear how it goes. So all the best for that. Let's get on into it. We've got a lot to talk about. And firstly, I want to highlight that you are 20 years younger than me, and I love that. So you've got all this lived experience. I've got all this lived experience. You've also got great lived experience when it comes to startup, as do I. So it'll be good to, I guess, cross-examine, kind of everything we've just been talking about pre-show and, and chat about that and get your view as well as, me sharing my view also. So like I said, Reece Griffiths, you're an exited YC founder and former McKinsey quantum black builder. You can explain all of this. Who co-founded Deasy Labs, YC S23, and essentially it's a metadata for AI company. And you had it acquired by Colibra on 24th of July, 2025. So what's that? Like just under 6 months ago, or nearly just under,
Yeah.
which is huge. So I'd love to hear all about that. And before Deasy, you led product in Quantum Black's data and AI group and previously consulted at McKinsey. You also hold a master in information engineering from Cambridge. And since the acquisition of Calibra of your business, Deasy Labs, you've now become an employee, which is always fascinating. I've experienced that. And you're a field CTO. So you've got that happening. You're in a full-time role, but you're also writing through Substack, I guess, article, or what do you call it? A Substack platform around stillness and scale. I shouldn't call it an article. And it's called Stillness and Scale. So everyone start following. And it's all about exploring how ambitious founders can ship meaningful work without losing their inner stillness. So there you go. You pair operational rigor with practices that reduce noise and increase presence. So on top of being a full-time employee, so that transition from startup scales, get acquired, you've also set up a community for founders and startups from a McKinsey perspective group called X26, and you've just had your first raise from a VC fund. I'm gonna hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about your journey. I was going to share your response to my question, but I think I'll hold with that for a second. Let you unpack a bit of most recently the journey and I guess the acquisition of Deasy Labs, and then we can get into everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's very, very well put. I mean, there's the like external facing version of the journey, which is obviously as you laid out. And then I think probably more interesting to me and also to people listening is kind of the internal journey that accompanied a lot of those steps. So maybe I'll start with the second, which is, in some ways I kind of see my life has been in three segments, which is kind of very, hardcore, aggressive, high performer mentality, which was, throughout university, getting into McKinsey, moving quickly through the ranks in McKinsey. And at the time, I mean, I don't think I was ever kind of close to burnout, but I certainly wasn't thinking about my inner state, peace, stillness, happiness in the way that I do now. And I think what happened, I feel extremely grateful, but like I think at each milestone in life, things kind of went to plan. And I guess I feel like it's a very privileged position to be in, but I kind of got the realization quite early that like all of these external things that people say are worth pursuing and chasing, like I feel like I'm getting them. And yet there is something internal that still, there is something missing. And I think I came to the realization early on, really two realizations, which are not original, but I think they hit me very hard. One was that all any of us actually want at our core is to feel like a deep sense of peace and love. And secondly, that external pursuits are not the path to getting to that state. And so I started like kind of carrying that mentality while still operating in this world which is not that conducive to building inner stillness. So then after McKinsey and Quantum Black, which was kind of like the AI arm of McKinsey, where as you mentioned, I was a product manager, I met my co-founders there. I knew I wanted to start a company, and the reason I wanted to start a company was simply that I was at a stage in my life where I just wanted to optimize for growth across kind of every dimension. So, cognitive growth, but also building self-awareness, being able to manage my time better. And I saw people around me kind of going, doing various things after McKinsey. And the people who I found most interesting, most aspirational, the one thing they had in common, they were all just trying to build something themselves. I think it's like the most direct path to kind of upskilling across many areas of your, of your toolkit and your personality as well. So I kind of came to that startup journey, but I think by this point, I had this quite clear feeling of, and I had a coach at the time, and just before starting the company, we did this interesting exercise where he pretended that I was on a podcast and the company had been successful. And we kind of did this like retrospective, what are you most proud of? And it became super clear to me in that moment that this kind of feeling of if the company succeeded, like materially, but internally, I don't feel like I became more and more at peace, then it would be a personal failure. And so like my mentality kind of going into the company, into Deasy Labs from day one was trying as much as possible to come back to that, which I think you referenced before the conversation. I care about the success of my company, but I care about my inner stillness or my inner growth just a little bit more.
Yeah, you actually said my entire startup and business journey has been defined as caring about the pursuit of inner peace a little more than the success of what I'm building, which is quite profound for a 29-year-old.
Yeah, I think I feel very lucky to have had so much conviction that, you know, a success, financially or reputationally, is not going to be the thing that ultimately has a material impact on my inner state. And I think over the years, I've consumed a lot of podcasts and listened to a lot of Michael Singer and these folks. I think
Yes, love him.
just yeah, right. One of I think the most inspirational people for me who
Oh my God,
describe like
same.
such profound inner states. So when I've listened to these people, I think it's been, and I often emphasize this, like I'm very happy in life. I'm very content. I have so many wonderful things in my life. But I also know that these states that people speak of who go very, very deep internally, like there is a very clear difference between the kind of, status quo, I'm happy in my life, versus having this deep kind of profound sense of peace and joy and unconditional love. So that was kind of what drove me to, I guess, make that statement. And I mean, the startup journey was definitely a roller coaster. I think by all accounts, it was smoother than many of the peers around me. And I think fast forward a couple of years, we managed to exit far quicker than we were expecting, and it was a better outcome than we would ever have expected. And again, I think the thing I'm most grateful for is, you know, since the exit, obviously, I've had some changes in my personal financial situation and material success. But again, I kind of feel like I just wrote a post on this, which is like basically we just sold the company, but I feel exactly the same. And I think it's been wonderful validation for the hypothesis that any kind of external success isn't going to be the driver. So I've become increasingly interested in how do we continue operating in the real world? How do we continue being ambitious, having projects, but really make meaningful progress on that? We can call it a spiritual path. I know for some people that term kind of deters them a little bit, but I think fundamentally that's what it is.
I think
And
it's just
maybe,
soul. Like for me, it's like just on that, just if we can pause for a second there and just chat about that a little bit. Like, yeah, I think that, it is everything you're talking about, that inner peace is it's like your soul. It's, ensuring that your soul feels nurtured. It feels at peace versus screaming at you like, what are you doing? Like unfulfilled. Like mine was screaming at me when I was like at a point of I've hit the top of my game and I'm so unfulfilled. And it was just like this loudness that was going on inside me. And I was like, well, like I can't ignore this anymore. And so we can call it, like you say, like you can put spirituality and soul stuff to the side. But unless we're interconnected as individuals, we can't be the best version as ourselves, whether that's in our personal lives, as leaders, in business, because there's a full disconnection going on there. So anyone who like, oh, that's all woo-woo or that's all BS, except I call BS back in terms of, well, then you're never going to be able to be shining your brightest or feeling your best because you have missed that ultimate what your soul and the internal system is screaming out for.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I think the like spirituality for me, I think became quite demystified through actually like listening and reading a lot of Michael Singer, kind of breaking it
Yeah.
down to a very logical level, which is like there is something, the idea that something makes me stressed is just a very flawed way of looking at the world. Like objects, people, situations they cannot be inherently stressful or anxiety inducing because everyone responds to them differently. So if a boss is inherently stressful, then every single person that ever interacts with that person would be stressed, which we know isn't true. And of course, there are some people, situations that have a higher propensity to, create that reaction, stress, anxiety in us. But it's truly like a choice and it's an internal thing, not driven by the external world. And I think for me, that is the essence of spirituality. Like life is happening, there is some experience. Do you choose to accept that experience as it is, or do you resist it? And in resisting it, you create suffering.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I mean, it's so funny you've brought up Michael Singer. I need to get back to listening to him. But when I was in the depths of my recovery from burnout or just in full burnout, I came across him. And oh my goodness, I just remember I used to go on these long walks along the beach near me. Like just the perspective he gave me at those points in time around, like you would have heard around the garbage mind, and he talks about this garbage mind and all these, and he talks about the ocean and like, really quite practical, like, on the day when the ocean's really crazy, it's a storm. And like just what that means for you and exactly what you're talking about from external, when, a leader or, something's happening in a business, it always calms down. And like, and so having that perspective to put, do you know what I mean? Like he's genuinely a great person to get a reality check from when you need one.
Yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely second that. Someone asked me the other day, very practically, like what are the best tips I have for staying grounded and at peace whilst building a startup in a crazy environment, living in Manhattan, seed stage, like you're counting the months until you go out of business. And there are a few things that helped me, but honestly, one of the best was just I listened to a mixture of Michael Singer and a couple other people, but podcasts just on repeat as I commuted to our office, as I was in the gym. Probably cumulatively, it was like an hour and a half a day. And that was just such a wonderful anchor. I think it just reminded me every single day of like, I guess, the truth of existence, of what it means to be human, of the source of suffering. And if you don't have an anchor and you're in an environment like building a tech startup in, a certain city, it's so easy to get pulled into, that other mentality. And sometimes you, I think, feel a bit alienated because everyone around you relates to what they're doing in a slightly different way. And having that, it just felt like this constant anchor, this comfort that was always there and kept me grounded and honest.
Was there one moment, Reese, where I mean, because you're wise beyond your years, like, or maybe it's a generational thing, right? You're a Gen Z, yeah, and like, I kind of look at you and like, when I was your age, I was completely not. I was just like, I was I was a hustle woman. Like, it was just like work hard, play hard, all of that. Like, I was just like climbing, climbing, climbing. It was almost like I was ignoring anything that like related to inner peace as such. I'd already started the journey. I was interested. I was looking for something. I've always been that sort of a person. But was there a moment for you that, like, I guess, where you came to this place where you were just like, did you have a burn? You said, sorry, you said you didn't have burnout, but was there something that happened where you were just like, or have you always just had that curiosity whereby you're like, I don't want to just have this external validation, or, if you think about inside out, outside in, I don't want an outside in way of living when it comes to, life, leadership and business. So I'm going to pursue what you coined as the third path for entrepreneurs. And I'll let you explain a bit about that third path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no one singular moment that I think was like this. I mean, you hear people, I think spiritual awakening for people, and I definitely don't claim to be at that point, but it happens to people often when they're in like a very extreme state of suffering that forces
Happened to
them to
me.
like, yeah, right. And that can be a wonderful, yeah, exactly. A wonderful, albeit unfortunate catalyst. I think for me, I remember my mom telling me like when I was a kid, I don't actually remember this, but asking her like very young age, like, what does it mean to be happy? And I think that's quite characteristic of my mentality through life. Like I've always kind of questioned what is happiness actually? What does it mean? And so I was drawn quite early on to, I guess, meditation more broadly as a way of understanding that. Um, I did I did a 10-day silent retreat before starting our company that was very helpful. I didn't have like a profound transformation. I remember people there at the end, we all described our experiences, and people were telling stories about how they walked through the forest and they felt one with the tree and all these things, and they spoke with loved ones. And I was like, wow, okay. I just felt a little bit more at peace, and that's okay. But it definitely, I think, really helped me show, it helped show me the the level of peace that is accessible when you just kind of really quieten down for a few days. And I hadn't really, I'd done kind of, regular meditation, but going beyond, a few days, I think there are some states of inner peace that you can experience. And what was interesting, that was a very turbulent point in my life. I just quit my job. I'd ended a relationship, like a 5-year relationship. I was moving countries. Everything was changing. And it was like objectively the worst time ever to disappear off the grid for 10 days. And I like the first few days were kind of crazy in my mind, running through everything I needed to do, all the people that I forgot to message before I went in. And then within like day 4 or 5, I was just, it actually reminded me what you said earlier, the kind of Michael thing. I think he talks about being in this ocean with all these waves. And at some point you realize you can just go underwater.
Yeah.
And suddenly like there is this calmness that is always accessible, however turbulent like
Yeah.
the surface
It's
might be. And that's what it felt like. Yeah.
it's one of the most profound episodes I've listened to, and because I live right near the water, and so every time I'm feeling that turbulence, I go down there and I think of that episode.
Yeah.
And because it just get rid of all the garbage, like, and the way he says it explains it. Tell me a little bit. So you start Deasy Labs, right? And you're pursuing this third path, which is for entrepreneurs, which is one where you can still build great things, you say, but you can still achieve, but from a place of peace and clarity rather than fear and restlessness. How many years had you been in scaling and building the business before you sold it, like, in terms of, or you were acquired? And what was that journey like in terms of, like, because it takes discipline to be grounded, present, at a place of peace. Like, I feel like we're quite often, and I love your thoughts on this as well, around oscillating between survival mode and thriving, or optimally thriving, I call it. And it's okay when you're in survival mode. You've got to be aware though enough to be able to pull yourself out back to the ocean that we've just been talking about. You must have had some moments along the way as well when you were, building this business and then the acquisition of it. That's pretty stressful in itself.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a couple of things. First thing, just to mention, which I think is a nice bridge. I knew I wanted to start a company for a while, and I had a very close friend of mine who I met him at a language learning school, and he was very similar position to me. He was in the US, I was in the UK at the time, and one day he texted me to say he had some news, and we'd always talked about entrepreneurship, psychology, spirituality, religion. And I thought he was going to tell me that he'd kind of beaten me to it to start his company, but it turned out he was telling me that he was going to become a monk. So he'd made the decision to like leave his entire life behind and become a monk. And I remember feeling at that point in time extremely happy for him, and I completely understood it. I think there were a lot of people around him at the time who didn't get it because his life from the outside in looked perfect. But like through all our conversations and my own, inner journey, I completely got it why he was doing it. Um, but I had this feeling of, should I be doing this? Like, should I be doing the same? And when I did one of these meditation retreats, we were allowed to write questions down, put them in a jar, and I remember writing down a question that was like really the thing that weighed on me the most at the time, which was like, I'm about to go and build this company and do like enter into this world, but I know deep down that like, the spiritual path and this inner growth is what's most important. Like, is this compatible? And the answer they gave was basically, all that matters is how you do something, not what you do. And I think I really grasped onto that. And that was kind of, you mentioned the third path, which is a term I used recently in something I was writing to try and describe this way of, you still do the ambitious thing, you still build the company, you still scale, you still move quickly, but you relate to it in a very different way that is conducive to actually growing internally. And actually, I came to see the startup world as a wonderful training ground because there are no shortage of situations that are going to create stress, that are going to worry you,
Yeah,
that, induce
absolutely.
anxiety. And so if you view the highest purpose of your journey to actually grow, then I think it's the only way that you can quickly flip every bad situation, every objectively negative thing into, oh, this is great, like another opportunity to let go, to surrender. And I think one of the interesting things that people, myself included, grapple with is this idea of acceptance versus being passive. So I think people often feel, okay, let's say, I have a conflict with a colleague in the company. If I accept that, then, I'm going to let them walk all over me, or I'm not going to make the decision I need to make. But I think, acceptance is such an internal thing, whereas like being passive is an external thing. And it takes courage, especially for like people that have been driven by fear, to realize that if when the fear isn't the thing driving you and you actually accept a situation for what it is, you don't become, a passive piece of driftwood, just, moving through life, but you end up entering into this place of like deep inner clarity and peace. I often kind of refer to it as like the Jedi, you can be very decisive, you can take really good action, but you're really grounded in a much more stable place. You're not acting from fear. So then the question becomes, how do you do that, which we can talk about. But that's kind of that's been the
Yeah, I'd love
essence
to
of the
talk
path.
about that. Because, again, I want to, there's something popping up for me as well there in terms of that surrendering, but also forgiving, just
Yeah.
forgiving like quite often we get so angry on the inside as well, and fear it brings up a lot of different things, right? But I think that also there's this ability to be able to let go, surrender. There's nothing more peaceful than surrendering and just forgiving, like, just that ability to be like, okay, they're doing the best they can with what they've got. Is it aligned to me and what's inside of me? Not necessarily, but they're doing the best they can with what they've got, and they're not necessarily going to evolve or, do the work. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that it's taken me a long time to do that in business situations as well, in terms of, I look back in some of my crazy, when we were scaling, etc. And gosh, the energy I wasted on just that, whether it was passive or whether it was being really fired up and just like, and then now I look back and go, I should have just let that shit go. Like, because
Yeah.
it just took up too much space. But
And the only
tell me,
person it's impacting is yourself, right? That's the irony with forgiveness. Like, if you're not forgiving someone, you are the person carrying that mental
100%.
burden, not
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Tell me a little bit about the acquisition from Calibra and you now being an employee, right? So you've got this whole, third path, if you like. We'll just call it that for now. Well, I want to talk also about, your founders, your X20X, community you've created as well. But in terms of the acquisition and then becoming an employee as a field CTO, cultures change. You would see this. I mean, I've been involved in quite a few M&As and, working with different businesses. You might have the culture you had with Deasy Labs, and then you're acquired by another business. And you're merging these two, operating models, if you like, or, living systems, if you like. Yours might be completely interconnected based on your principles, etc. And then you come into another business, and I'm not suggesting Clever is like that. But did you notice things that changed for you as well? Like, were there things that you were like, oh, actually, I need to, like, if we come back to this passive versus, like surrendering and letting go, did you notice anything about yourself as part of this transition?
I think what happens is, I think the biggest difference is, so certainly there are cultural differences. And to be honest, the acquisition was 6, 7 months ago. So certainly the teething and growing pains that happen when you integrate, we're still probably learning what those are going to be,
Yeah, totally. No, 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 exactly.
for
It's early
sure.
days. Yeah.
It's early. I think one of the big differences is when you move into a bigger company is you just realize the variety of different people and personalities. And I think, the types of personality that are drawn towards a very early stage startup and, whether that's work ethic, whether that's mentality, whether that's, being able to chop and change and wear a million hats. There's a certain archetype of person that typically, will be in that environment. And you realize as you move into a company with, hundreds or thousands of employees, there is such a wide variety of people. So I think one of the interesting things for me is learning how to work as effectively as possible with very different types of people. And again, see that as an opportunity, not like not a frustration of people being different and thinking differently, but like, what can I learn about myself? What can I learn here in terms of how to motivate people differently? And you see, in a bigger company, incentives are incredibly different. There's a really good book that I like that I read a while ago. I think it's called Loon Shots. And
Oh,
it
yes.
talks about
Someone
this
else told
idea.
me about that. I need to get
Yeah,
it.
it's the idea of after you reach some point, some size in the company, the incentive shifts from being about the collective to being about the individual. And I
Mm.
think that, we're certainly in a company of the size where people, rightfully so, care about themselves and their job security and their progression. And I think that's something, coming from the startup world, you have to start taking account of, and definitely comes with a lot of opportunity for learning. One thing I also wanted to say to your prior point, you mentioned, there must have been times where things were stressful and so on. I
Yeah.
definitely don't want to come off as if, I certainly aspired to use all the challenges as opportunities to surrender, but there were absolutely times where I failed miserably, and that was to be expected. And that's why, coming back to the beginning, think I mentioned I sort of see my life as three phases. Phase one was the aggressive hyperachiever. I'm going to perform at all costs. Phase two was actually building the company, which was really trying to recenter the purpose of my path to be more and more about letting go and learning what worked. And now kind of this new phase, which is doing that, but to a more extreme level. So, you know, really in terms of, hours of meditation and how much attention I pay to like being present in small things and treating my life really as an experiment right now, that's become very, very central. And I would say it's, yeah, definitely a step change since the startup as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating because that in itself is got lots of questions. Gosh, I feel like we need a part 2 of some point of this, this pod. Maybe it's after your silent routine, down the track, maybe down later in the year. But your third phase you're in right now, I mean, I said to you pre-show, 20 years older, like it doesn't stop. We don't stop evolving. It's a continuous, and that's why for me that formless, reshaping and shaping continuously. We're always evolving. For you, in terms of, what success looks like, right? We were talking about that also, pre-show and redefining what success looks like. In this third phase you're in, do you feel like, you come across as somebody, here you are raising your first VC fund for a 26 community. So you've still got this ambition, right? Do you feel like you can still achieve as much in terms of from a business perspective in this third phase whereby you are more focused on, meditating and a lot of inner peace and stillness, etc.? I guess what my basic question is around this is time. Like, how do you find the time to do it all? Or have you prioritized that this inner peace, this stillness, this exploration, that is your priority and everything else comes secondary to it?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And the very candid answer is I'm basically trying to treat my life as an experiment to see what the answer is to that question. Um, because I this year and some of last year, I really tried to sit down and say, like, what would my life actually look like if I truly was prioritizing that inner path over everything else? And initially I realized I was just trying to do everything, but just like layer in a few extra hours of meditation, and it wasn't going to really change much. And so I kind of forced myself to try and come up with an operating model that actually made me feel uncomfortable, meaning made the like hyperachiever part of me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
too.
So it's right. So that's definitely where I'm at. And I think I'm really interested in making it work, meaning I do believe it's possible to achieve extremely, and the startup was kind of evidence to me for this. Like, I think it's absolutely possible to achieve very significant things whilst having this pursuit, but I think it does require a lot of discipline, and above all it requires integration. So I think about like how the kind of how of that is like three parts to it. One is like dedicated meditation, spiritual practice, which I think has to be there. For me, it's like, it's really important to like deepen the familiarity with like being in that state so you can access it more easily, so you can carry it through the day. That could be, an hour of meditation, half an hour of meditation a day, and then retreats. So for me this year, it's pre-booking, 3, 4, 5 retreats at different points in the year. So I think that's kind of one piece, having like enough time for dedicated practice. Then the second is integration. So this is what I'm super fascinated by, because I actually think if you can transform your work into a spiritual practice, then this whole time issue that you mentioned falls away. And so I think that's where, and I wrote a piece called How to Build from Peace. And it was all about these kind of, a number of sort of tactical things in there, around, for example, this morning I was writing in a cafe, and I had a meeting at 8:30 starting, and sometimes I would leave the cafe at like 8:27 and like rush back and then be in this frantic mode. Today I left at like 8:24, and it's crazy. Like, those extra 3 minutes allowed me to walk like really slowly home and just stay in this like very peaceful state that I was in when I was writing. And the place I was in when I entered the meeting was very different. Same thing with like, uh, every door you go through, making a habit of touching the handle and noticing the temperature. Just these kind of like micro adjustments, or when you're waiting in the meeting room on a Zoom call, building a habit of, taking 3 deep breaths and
Yeah.
coming back to presence. And I really like the idea of taking kind of one activity every week, every few weeks, and trying to intentionally turn it into a meditation. So responding to LinkedIn messages, for example. And one thing I often use, and my partner laughs at me, is like a gong, like one of these YouTube timers that like goes off every 3 minutes or something. And it just reminds you, like, frankly, that your mind has wandered off, and then you take a breath and come back to it. So I'm
Oh,
really
that's cool.
interested
I like
in,
that.
yeah, all these like practical ways to basically keep doing the work, but really deepen presence is ultimately what it is in all of
Yeah.
those interactions.
Another one I have is Om. Like the sound
Yeah,
playing that really like not like high volume, but slow volume whilst you're doing stuff. But it's so fascinating, right? I think you can achieve more when you have that interconnected piece. I know when I've got that garbage in my mind, let's use that, or and I'm rushing and I'm not connected. It's only when I now come back and I think because of my own experience and having the dark night of the soul and, having to, rebirth and go through the dark despair of that, there's no other option for me now. Like the minute, like it just gets loud and it just like almost like stops me in my tracks and then I come back and I'm like, okay, yes,
yeah,
perfect, right? Like just calling that out. No one's perfect. We all have those moments.
for sure.
We've got a few minutes left, and Reece, I'm very conscious you are about to hit a silent meditation. Just quickly tell us a little bit about the community you've created, X26, and are you applying everything, your third phase? Is that a big part of the X26 community that you're building?
Yeah, I mean, so X26 is, as you mentioned, is like a community that I started with a few friends 4 or 5 years ago. Really, the goal was, from McKinsey, there's a lot of people leaving to start companies, and for whatever reason, if you look at Google or MIT, these organizations often have kind of startup support communities, but it didn't exist at McKinsey. So that was the goal. I think so. I'll answer your question in two ways. One is I see my life broadly as like a canvas for this whole kind of experiment, which includes all the different projects. And six, we have a lot of ambitions, a lot of goals. And it's one of the areas where I'm really practicing to reduce the amount of time I'm spending on something, but try and improve the output. Because, like, the other way to look at it is I always believe, work expands to fill the time you allocate to it. And reducing allocated time, I think, forces you to, improve decision making, be more
Be more
focused,
optimized.
prioritize. So to your earlier point, I think there is something around, uh, you know, meditating more and confining time can actually improve output because you're clearer, you're not making decisions from fear. You realize, like, a lot of my challenges during the startup was not being willing to commit to a path, to focus ultimately from a
Focus.
place of fear.
Yeah.
And again, the more you kind of invest in the spiritual path, the more you see that, the more you see through it, the more you can actually make clearer minded decisions. So certainly applying that to
You
X26
can
is
also get into
important.
flow state more quicker, like
Yeah,
access flow where, like, yeah.
exactly. And deep work is a big one that this year, I have a friend who inspired me a lot. We do like a retreat every year in Poland. It's like most of my friends are entrepreneurs now. We go away to the mountains for like 6 days and we all just plan our years and reflect and stuff. And he was basically saying that he's managed to cut down his work to like 2 90-minute blocks every day of deep work. And then everything else he does in his day is basically just routines to improve how productive he's going to be in those deep work blocks. He has a very
Yes.
specific job, so that wouldn't work for most of us, but I
Mm.
inspired me a lot. And so, like, leaning into those practices. And then the last thing I'll mention on X26 is, I run it. One of the people that I run it with was actually my coach. So we spend a lot of time planning and running like founder retreats. So we do try and create a space for founders where, along with the fundraising help and the investor intros and the resources and the hiring help and the practical stuff, more kind of going a few layers deeper and trying to create either retreats or environments or workshops where founders can actually surface like the real problems they're having, the deeper fears.
Yeah.
We really believe that like self-awareness is like the superpower of a founder.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's and it's so funny when you go into business. It's not funny, but when you go into businesses and you're talking and they're talking about all these external problems and it's like, no, actually what's going on here is in here. Like it's happening. It's like it's coming back to their own awareness of, well, what's actually triggering this. It's always like, that's why it's always inside out. It's never outside in. And, business, leader as well. Tell me, final question for you. What do you, based on everything we've been talking about, you've been in obviously from an AI metadata company and your background when it comes to being, a CTO, etc. How, like, I think about like the world, it's moving so fast. And, this year in particular feels like it's going to be way faster than last year. And we're moving into a new year cycle with the horse like bolting forward, etc. Like how important do you think this, stillness and inner peace is required? Like, given business, I should say, given everything that's going on, and like with the tech, everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I subscribe to. I think Eckhart Tolle has a whole piece on this, and he has a book. I think it's called A New World. I'm blanking on the name, but the idea of this, which I believe is the world at some point was kind of undeveloped, and then we developed, minds and thinking, and we started building all these things, and it was wonderful. But in the process, we became very unconscious, and the net kind of consciousness level of the world right now is very low.
Mm,
And if we can't increase that, like, it's going to be very hard for humanity to survive in the long run. We're going to destroy
yeah.
ourselves one way or another. So I do believe there's like I mean, you could say it's the only way to kind of eventually long term save the world is if people, more people, especially kind of leaders in the world, start to wake up. Because I think, if you're tapping into that part of you and you realize, as you said, interconnectivity, you feel more empathy. It's it's unthinkable to do some of the things that we see happening in the world if people can tap into that space. And I mean, there's often a lot of pushback from more like activist people who, coming back to what you said earlier, if I accept something as it is, then we would never have change. And I think that's a really important idea to break because, again,
Yeah.
acceptance, I think, is internal, and you can accept a terrible situation, but that does not mean you're not going to take action. And I think that's a really key piece to this whole movement and trying to bring about a better world.
Yeah, I love it. So good. It's I've termed a leadership. It's soulful. It's high flow. It's conscious. It's leadership. It's that back to that, presence. Purpose and performance, and yeah, and that conscious piece is just so important. Do you have any final words of wisdom you want to share with the audience? You've shared so much, and you've given us a lot of micro tips. Do you have any other micro tips when it comes to the third path for entrepreneurs?
Uh, So many. I think I'm also like learning every day. I mean, I think a few things that I can just say three things I'm finding super helpful right now. One is I'm taking pretty copious, I call them field notes, which are just like every day. And usually it's just like a dump on my phone of just little observations of like what triggered me, moments
Yeah.
where I felt more peace, what gave me energy, what depleted it. And at the end of the week, I'm literally throwing them into Claude AI and asking for, just a summary of my key patterns and comparing it to last week and coming up with like a stillness score. And that's been really helpful actually to spot a few trends and every week to kind of based on those observations to decide what is one I'm going to experiment with for next week to change that. So that's really helpful. Another thing that I really like that I'm trying to do a lot of right now is this idea of deliberate cognition.
Yeah.
And this I was inspired. I went to a retreat in late last year, and there was a monk who gave a talk. And part of the talk, he actually showed us his Google Calendar, which was like so funny to me. Just to think that a monk, like a
Yeah,
true
100%.
monastic individual, had a Google Calendar. But like my insight, which was super interesting, is he was kind of saying he knows how much of each day is going to be spent thinking about the future. So he know when you're planning, inherently you can be present when you're planning, but you are kind of being drawn into this,
Yes.
forward-looking mentality, which has a place. But I think it's really important to separate that from, okay, I'm going to be present for this time, and then I'm going to have this period where I'm going to do my planning. And I think being just my takeaway was, how can I be more intentional about the windows in my life where I'm going to plan, where I'm going to do a reset, where I'm going to evaluate. And then when I move out of that window, I go back to full presence. And it's really important for me to know that I have that point in my calendar in my week, because otherwise I know I'm going to be stressing about, am I doing enough? Is this right? Whereas if I have that anchor, which you call it like a retrospective or whatever, where you're going to go into, I usually have a set of questions that I refer to, which are really helpful. That just helps me be comfortable with being present the rest of the time. And maybe
Amazing.
one last one I can share is this idea of strategic inefficiency, which is like I've started to try and block times for doing nothing because
I
it
call it
felt so
non-time.
uncomfortable.
Non-time, I call it. Like,
Non-time. Yeah, okay,
yeah,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's probably a better term. Where I've been just like either just sitting, can be going for a walk, but with no intention, no expectation, no podcast, no music, And what's ironic is actually I've had some of my best ideas
100%.
in that period. So initially I was the reason I was doing it was because it felt uncomfortable. So I was like, that's great. I believe that discomfort is a wonderful compass for where we should go. So I was like, this is the most uncomfortable thing I could do right now is to do nothing, given all the stuff my mind wants me to do. But then as a nice byproduct, I ended up having a wonderful ideas in those periods. So it became more like the strategic
Yeah, I love it.
inefficiency and
It's so good. Yeah, it's so
yeah.
good. A lot of entrepreneurs and founders do it. Oh my gosh, Reece, what an episode! I'm gonna let you go, and I'm gonna get back to my weekend as well. How do we find out more about you? Obviously, you've got your Substack platform, which is it Reece Griffiths? Is that your Substack platform?
Yeah, the you newsletter.
That's the word I was looking
I
for.
know,
I
I was like, I
probably
know
kept
you were also
missing, but I'm
blanking
like,
earlier.
what is it?
Newsletter is called Stillness and Scale. But yeah, the Reece Griffiths, I believe, is the Substack. I'm mostly on Substack and then LinkedIn, just Reece Griffiths on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow. I can't wait to hear about your Zoom silent retreat meditation. Thank you so much for your time. What a privilege and what an honor. I need to, yeah, it's good to have these conversations. They're so important and so required in the new world we're in. And like you say, it is around how do you redefine success and what does it look like from the inside out, not the outside in. And I think the more that we can get back to inner stillness, inner peace, well, I call it interconnection of, mind, body, and soul. I think we're going to be better as a society, better in business, better as leaders, and just be better people. So have a wonderful retreat and thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I think the work you're doing and the ideas you're promoting are so important. So yeah, a real pleasure to chat.
Thanks, Reece. Enjoy.
Thanks, B.